Affairs of Denmark. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Corinne Momal-Vagnon. I'm the Executive Director of the Kofi Annan Foundation. A very warm welcome to our audience who is following us on this platform, Blue Jeans platform, but also on Facebook as the event is being live streamed on our Facebook page. The number of people who have signed up for the event, despite the many webinars which have been held over the past few months, and we fully recognize it's been a long year for many of us and many of you, and we have had to attend many of these conversations online. And yet you have chosen to join us this morning. We're grateful, and we think this is an indication of the importance that everybody attaches to the issue of youth inclusion in peace and security, and to marking the 5th anniversary of the United Nations Security Council resolution on youth, peace and security. And indeed, for us, the idea for the event came after consultations that were held during the summer by our extremely together young leaders around the world. And the youth that they have talked to globally during the summer have clearly said that there is an important gap between the leadership that they have shown in crises such as this terrible pandemic and their continued exclusion from many peace and security processes. So we have captured the outcome of these consultations in a document that is available online on our website, a policy paper, which is entitled Why Youth Leadership when Dealing with Complex Crisis Must No Longer Be Ignored. And we hope very much that this conversation will add to these important findings. One of the recommendations, in fact, of the paper is to create opportunities for sharing of experience and best practices, and this is exactly what we will aim to do during this event this morning. The event will be structured in two parts. The first part will be about sharing best practices and getting inspired by things that people in various international organizations, governments, civil society organizations have done. And the second part will be about the remaining steps to make youth inclusion in peace building and prevention of violent extremism efforts a reality. So in other words, the first part will be about what's working, and the second part will be about what's missing. We will try to have an interaction with our audience as much as possible, and so please feel free to ask questions using the question and answer feature if you are a registered participant, but you can also ask questions on Facebook in the comment box. And if you want to communicate about this event, please tag the event and use the hashtag Youth for Peace, 4 being the digit 4. Thank you very much. To kick off this event, I have the very great pleasure of introducing Mrs. Christina Markus Lassen, who is a political director in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, and she will deliver opening remarks right now. Mrs. Lassen, you have the floor. Mrs. Lassen, I'm afraid you may still be muted.
I'll start all over again. And
I'm so sorry. Yes, if you could. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. But thanks, Corinne, and good morning, everyone, friends all over the world. It is indeed my privilege and pleasure to, on behalf of the Kofi Annan Foundation and the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to deliver the opening remarks for today's event, which marks, of course, the 5-year anniversary of the Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace and security. And as Corinne was just saying, we are obviously organizing this event during highly unusual circumstances, which made it impossible for us to meet in person, but rather we all have to participate from our homes all over the world. But we believe that the important thing was to meet today and celebrate this anniversary and the principles and aspirations behind it. So Resolution 2250 marks, of course, the formal recognition of the important role that young people play in preventing and resolving conflict and violent extremism. It cements that young people are key in realizing peace and security from the local to the global level. And this is why Resolution 2250 was a milestone in our efforts towards achieving sustainable peace. Since 2015, the agenda for increased youth inclusion has gained momentum, often because of young people's own actions and demands. Young people are now increasingly recognized as peace builders and agents for change in preventing, mitigating, and resolving conflicts in their communities. We've seen, for example, tens of thousands of young people carrying out peaceful climate action, alerting the older generation of the negative consequences of climate change. And thousands of young people have taken to the streets in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Sudan, to peacefully protest against bad governance and sectarianism, and in favor of inclusiveness and peace. And this is, of course, just to mention a few examples. In the past 5 years, we've seen a wealth of efforts pushing the YPS agenda forward, from the international framework of Security Council resolution over regional and local initiatives to the tireless work of youth-led civil society organizations on the peace and security agenda. And these are all efforts that we should applaud and acknowledge today. Although we've come a long way in the past 5 years, there is still a long way to go. And while youth have the right to participate and be heard in matters regarding their own lives, they continue to encounter both structural barriers and societal limitations to their participation in peace and security efforts. 2020 has, of course, as we just mentioned before, been an unusual year for all of us, with the whole world affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And while the global pandemic has not made the barriers to youth participation any smaller, it has, however, also highlighted the positive role that youth can play in their communities. In this kind of time of crisis, young people around the world have shown action. They've been a source of hope and inspiration in our fight against a common threat, both through innovative approaches to disease prevention and control, but also and importantly through countering misinformation, both online and offline. They have shown that young people are not just to be regarded as peripheral stakeholders, but as equal partners of peace. I'm therefore really proud today to say that Denmark is one of the pioneering countries to mainstream youth into our work. One of the things we've done is to have a dedicated global youth advisor who works to promote the youth agenda within our foreign ministry, and you'll be listening to her in just a moment in the panel. But also internationally, Denmark was one of the countries advocating by YPS to be included in the European Council conclusions on youth in external action. We facilitate that young people's voices are heard in the UN through UN youth delegates, and we support the implementation of the UN youth strategy, which also has focus on YPS. Locally around the world, we're engaging youth directly in our work at our embassies through youth sounding boards, where young people can give their perspectives directly to our peace and security work. And finally, also to mention that we have developed toolkits to address YPS in our work and have a strong focus on developing and supporting youth-led work throughout our collective efforts. We therefore strongly believe in supporting organizations such as the Kofi Annan Foundation, who are leading change and preventing violent extremism in their own communities. But working alone is of course not enough. And that's why we are happy that today's event will address some of the good practices for youth inclusion and building peace. Sustainable peace and security is a tough nut to crack, but by working together, learning from each other, and engaging in intergenerational dialogue, we will be able to succeed. So let me just conclude by saying that by working with young people rather than just for young people, and applying these principles in our peace and security work, I have no doubt that we will achieve a stronger and more long-lasting peace. So I look forward to the discussion today, and I hope to see your continued active engagement. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Christina, and thank you really to Denmark for being at the forefront of promoting the youth agenda and better inclusion of young people in peace and security efforts. And we certainly look forward to hearing some of these good practices from IDA. But let me now introduce the whole panel. We have very distinguished panels today. We're very lucky. And they will share some of their perspectives from policy to practice and through the lenses of a member state, an international organization, a member of a civil society organization. So we'll have a very rich range of perspectives. So we have Mrs. Hilde Hardeman, who is the Director and Head of Service for Foreign Policy Instruments of the European Commission. We have Mrs. Christine de Peyron, who is the Director and Deputy Managing Director for Human Rights, Global and Multilateral Issues at the European External Action Service of the European Union. And in the true spirit of the day, Mrs. de Peyron will be joined today by Mr. Paul Clare, who was the German youth delegate to the United Nations General Assembly this fall, I believe. Ms. Ida Paeto is the Global Youth Advisor, as Christina said, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark. And last but certainly not least, our very own Syed Ali Abbasid, who is the Kofi Annan Foundation's Extremely Together young leader. And he's also the campaign manager of the Extremely Together Pakistan chapter. So welcome to you all. Thank you very much for being with us. As I said, we will try to make this a little bit interactive. So we want to try to start with a little poll. So people who are registered participants can take a poll online. On the right side, there is a button that you can click to take the poll. And we would like to ask everybody in the audience to vote by selecting one of 6 options regarding what, in your opinion, remains the biggest challenge today to youth inclusion in peace building. And the 6 options are as follows. 1, and there are many other obstacles we recognize, but 1 is lack of access to funding mechanisms. 2, difficulty to access information on how to get involved. 3, obstacles to register as a legal entity. 4, not being valued as a credible actor as a young person. 5, security risk, and they are real in many places. And 6, reluctance from the family or the community. So we will reflect a little bit. The poll will remain open for a few minutes, and then we will reflect on the outcome. So it's time to start the panel discussion. As I said, this first part is really about what's working and how we can emulate some of the best practices that we have been applying. We'd like to start with Mrs. Hardeman, Hilde, and I would like to ask you, Hilde, as the biggest donor for international aid in the world, really, the European Union has real leverage. It has the power to leverage this funding to accelerate youth inclusion in peace and security. So at the foreign policy instrument, what are the good practices that you have developed to ensure the meaningful inclusion of young people in shaping peace?
Thank you very much. It's a big, big pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you very much to the Kofi Annan Foundation and to the Danish Ministry for Foreign Affairs for setting this up. It's really a pleasure to be part of this discussion to celebrate such an important agenda and to reflect on our respective and collective engagement to maximize the role that youth can play as actors of positive change. Now, you've said it as a service that spearheads the European Union's responses to crisis and conflict. We are in the Service for Foreign Policy Instruments very well aware of the challenges that young women and men face in fragile societies, where decision-making, governance and access to resources is often considered the privilege of a few to the detriment of the majority of the population. And this injustice is felt even more strongly when youth accounts for a significant part of the population, which is the case in many of the context where we work. So what have we done? First, we actively support initiatives to strengthen the role of youth in peace building. We currently have over 30 youth-oriented conflict prevention and crisis response actions across all the continents and addressing all the aspects of United Nations Security Council Resolution 2020-50, participation, protection, prevention, partnership, disengagement and reintegration. And I would like to give you just a few examples. In Kenya, we have supported the production and broadcasting of a reality show called Mrs. President, which aimed to promote young women leadership. And boy, has this been a success. We had millions of watchers every session, and the people involved have really become celebrities with a lot of impact. We also work to strengthen the role of youth in tackling violent extremism in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the Philippines, including with the Kofi Annan Foundation. We support Sahrawi youth in promoting a culture of peace in refugee camps in Algeria and the participation of youth in peace and reconciliation efforts in the Kasai region in the Democratic Republic of Congo by engaging with local media. So that is the first angle, concrete specific actions in concrete situations. The second element that I want to put to you is that we support putting inclusion at the heart of all we do. And that is why we have developed a key performance indicator on conflict sensitivity for our work that will measure inclusion, including gender and age for all of our actions. So inclusion should be a central part of all we do. And this should make us and our implementing partners even better at identifying opportunities and needs to give our actions the best possible conditions to succeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hilde, and indeed, thank you, by the way, for the support that the European Union brings to our activities in Asia. We're very grateful. But thank you for really pointing out that your some of the best practices in terms of concrete action, and I wish I could see this TV show in Kenya, really. That sounds very interesting. And the importance of having key performance indicators on inclusion, and that maybe is part of the question that we'll come back to later, because it can sound quite technical, but I think this is very, very fundamental. So now our next speaker is Mrs. de Peyron. And Kristin, I would like to ask you, because the EU is also an influential actor at the policy level. Could you give us one or two examples of how the external action service is pushing for the participation of young people in your own external relations?
Thank you. Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm really delighted to be with you today, and thank you to the Kofi Annan Foundation and the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs for organizing this. It's a true pleasure. Now, listen, we've expressed support for the youth peace and security agenda since the first Security Council resolution 5 years ago, and you can also, we've also adopted, or our council has adopted conclusions, as Christina, Markus, Lassen said, on youth and external action earlier this year in June. And if you take a look at those, if you look them up, you will see that we have a very clear ambition to amplify the voices of youth in external action. Now, resolutions, texts are important, but more important is their implementation. And it's very clear for us that youth are agents of change, and we want to work with youth, not just for youth. And I'll give you a couple of concrete examples of what we have done and what we're doing. If I go to Africa first, The cooperation with youth is absolutely central in our partnership with Africa. This was key when we worked up to our recent summit in 2017. Well, not so recent anymore, but we worked with youth on an AU-EU youth track, and that has then been formalized as an umbrella for all activities and initiatives for youth inclusion. And now, as we're preparing for the next summit, we are also reconfirming youth as a common priority. One of the flagships that we're building on that came out of this engagement is a youth hub between the African Union and the EU. And here we have 50 young experts who've been working on developing innovative pilot projects that are being rolled out just right now to civil society organizations. And hundreds of youth are engaged in a really, truly unique and innovative model of governance of this project. And then in this, there is a peace and security cluster, which is central. And this is implemented, there's a project which is implemented by Plan International with local partners since January this year, with a focus on the Lake Chad Basin. And it involves local youth in mapping and monitoring the stabilization projects, and it's articulated with the AU Commission Lake Chad Basin Commission Stabilization Strategy. Secondly, we also prioritize youth partnerships and civil society networks as a very important tool for social cohesion and empowering youth. And one good example of that is the so-called Young Mediterranean Voices initiative, through which we are working with civil society, educational institutions and policymakers to connect across the Euromed region. And the focus here is really on promoting intergenerational and intercultural dialogue and fostering youth leadership through training, capacity building, peer-to-peer advice and networking opportunities. And last year alone, more than 4,400 youth from 8 countries in 75 cities in the region qualified as trained debaters. And thirdly, a bit closer to home, we're also bringing together our member states' youth envoys. And in addition to encouraging our member states to invite their respective youth envoys, and Paul, who will speak later, is a good example of that, to relevant discussions in the council, where we have working party on youth as well. We're increasingly drawing upon them when we speak in international fora, as I have the pleasure of doing today, to sharing my slots with Paul. And recently, youth envoys joined our head of delegation in New York when he addressed the Security Council and the General Assembly, where we take a really active role in promoting the youth peace and security agenda. So again, really happy to have Paul here and to meet you virtually. I'm hoping we'll meet more in future live, so to speak. But all of the areas I've spoken about, working with youth, supporting partnerships and civil society networks and investing in youth are key to ensure that youth can effectively fulfill their roles as agents of change to prevent conflicts and build and sustain peace. So I stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Christina, and indeed we will hear from Paul a little bit later. And thank you for highlighting such a wide range of interesting practices from working with the civil society organizations in particular. I think the issue of capacity building has been highlighted over and over again. So thank you for highlighting this as well. And the idea of having young people participating fully in the multilateral fora, as Paul did, is also one that came out clearly from our summer consultations. So our next speaker is Ida Paeto. As we have said before, Denmark is often cited as an example of mainstreaming youth participation in development efforts. But maybe, Ida, you can tell us also how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has adapted its work to contribute to this youth in peace and security agenda.
Yeah, thank you very much, Corinne. And it's really a pleasure to be part of this panel today and also to work together with you in the Kofi Annan Foundation. So the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs started to mainstream youth into work about 5 years ago. And what does that mean, mainstreaming? I mean, it means that we are trying to put youth across everything we do, rather than having one dedicated youth strategy. It's still a work in process and it takes a bit of time. But one of the first things that we did was to review our efforts and see where we could improve and how we could improve. one of the things that we found was having a dedicated person, a global youth advisor, which is the function that I have today, to sort of mainstream and put youth forward in all of our efforts and everything that we do. And that also includes efforts on youth peace and security. Now, Denmark is a small country, so we try to be, in general, first movers on some of these agendas, in order to see if we can inspire other people or other countries to follow through and to follow example. We try to push boundaries, and we try to focus on multiple areas at the same time. So to give you some concrete examples of what we have done, we do work internationally. We work in-house in our own ministry. We work at our embassies, and then we also look at the choice of partners that we have. So internationally, we try to bring up youth peace and security and youth issues whenever we can, in the UN, in the EU, with partner countries, with partner organizations. And we're pushing for youth peace and security to be included in international negotiations. So EU, as one of our biggest partners and also one of the biggest donor, Denmark was one of the countries that really pushed for the council conclusions on youth to be adopted, and also pushed for youth peace and security to be part of the council conclusions. Then in-house, we have the Global Youth Advisor, a toolkit that also focuses on youth peace and security, where we address everything from indicators to where we address indicators that are both on the strategic level, but also on the outcome level. So that the rationale is that if young people are part of the analysis, they must also be part of the implementation. In our embassies, we have youth sounding boards. In some of the selected embassies, we have youth sounding boards where young people are directly involved in giving advice to the embassy. And I think that's one of the things that has worked really well so far, and one of the things that we're also trying to expand on to other embassies that we have. Then again, in our choice of partners and projects, we really try to focus on and emphasize that we are working with organizations that work with and by youth rather than just for youth. And Kofi Annan Foundation and the Extremely Together is really an extremely good example of this on the youth peace and security agenda, but we also do it in terms of job creation. That's also part of youth peace security, and on many other aspects. So really trying to mainstream young people throughout the things that we do, and then working with this mantra that we're working with and by youth rather than just for youth, and including them in everything that we do. I think that's my 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ida, because I mean, you managed in 3 minutes to mention a lot of really important things, such as the toolkit and the youth sounding boards in the embassy. Your own presence as the Global Youth Advisor is, of course, a good practice, and thank you also for mentioning the Extremely Together program on which we cooperate with Denmark. And in fact, our last speaker for this first part of the panel is one of our Extremely Together young leaders, Syed Ali Abbasid, and he leads the national chapter of Extremely Together in Pakistan. So he has a direct experience in the ground, is very rooted in practical experience, and he can tell us today what, in his experience in preventing violent extremism in Pakistan, what actually works in fostering youth leadership. Thank you, Ali. The floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the Kofi Annan Foundation for arranging this very important discussion. I have been working to tackle violent extremism in Pakistan for over 15 years now. And coming straight to the question of what fosters youth leadership in PVE work, first of all, I think the mere acknowledgement from all stakeholders in the PVE ecosystem that PVE, the violent extremism, is indeed a very complex cross-sectional phenomenon that manifests as a unique dynamic in different locales goes a long way. This is then reflected in holistic solutions that engage broad range of youth imaginations in a coherent narrative rather than singular, often very politically charged counter narratives. And in that, we have to consider economics, culture, religion, international wars, histories, colonialization, and local politics, etc. Secondly, establishing platforms that transform youth from volunteers to leaders, from consumers of content to producers of content, gives them the experience of leadership that they aspire to have. We have been following the same mechanism here in Pakistan, where Syed and other local partners are working on a model of transformative leadership to youth-led PVE. The system that we have created provides equal opportunities to volunteers to work their way up the ladder and become national level and international level leaders. Thirdly, I think peer-to-peer engagement that centers around accessible and real-life role models rather than distant, romanticized figures of historical past is vital. This drives youth action as a feedback loop of inspiration and action. And last but not the least, I think the doctor-patient style relationship between development actors and beneficiaries needs to be disrupted now and transformed into an emancipatory model wherein the so-called beneficiary youth have the power to influence and change the very frameworks that do not make sense in the unique local circumstances. And a great example of this is Extremely Together, which I've been affiliated with in the last 4 years, because in Extremely Together, all the young leaders that drive Extremely Together have the power to devise the very foundations on which we do the PVE programming work locally and internationally. So that's my bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali, and really thank you for putting your finger on this very important, simple but yes, fundamental part of ensuring the success of youth inclusion is having it driven by young people themselves, and breaking away, as you said, from this model of doctor beneficiary is really key, I think, to the success of Extremely Together, and also for highlighting the importance of having accessible and inspiring role models. And I really like what you said about this positive loop of reinforcing, because those people who are inspired by positive role models can become themselves role models afterwards. So I'm sure there will be many more questions for all of you later, but you've been incredibly good at keeping to your timing, all the speakers, which is not always the case. So thank you so much. And so this was the first part of the discussion. And now we'd like to show you also, to continue from this practical experience on the ground. We've had Ali talk from Pakistan, but we'd like to show you a little video from our chapter in Uganda. So if you bear with us, this is very brief, but it will give you a reality check. Thank you.
As part of the Extremely Together global movement, the Uganda chapter was established in 2018 as a partnership between the Kofi Annan Foundation and the Uganda Muslim Youth Development Forum. The youth-led chapter uses trainings, dialogues, and art to help young people take a leadership role in preventing violent extremism and promoting togetherness within their community. In Bugiri district, in the eastern part of Uganda, the Obama Street has become famous because of the violent youth gang that operates in the area. If these young people are not given an opportunity to air out their views and find solutions to the challenges they face, they will become vulnerable to recruitment by violent extremists. This is why the Extremely Together chapter organized a dialogue between the Obama Street youth and the district authorities.
Gwebuzaako ente ze bagabira abavubuka bameka mu municipality abafuna enkoko ziriwa.
When you have something you can do, please come to us. Kubanga services they demand driven. You have to express your interest and what can you do and how serious are you.
In Kampala, Extremely Together Uganda chapter uses theatre with secondary school students to break existing barriers and biases, to spread messages about peace and unity.
Bias flows from old generation to new generation, just like a river into an ocean, sowing seeds of hatred within the people.
Following the violence that erupted during the primaries and ahead of the January 2021 presidential election, Extremely Together Uganda chapter organized a dialogue between young people, political party representatives, and youth contesting in elections. The dialogue focused on how youth can actively, meaningfully, and peacefully participate in elections. Why we were embarking on youth, it's because youth are the targets of individual interests, and they are the tools that are used to carry out this election violence while it's happening.
Tulekerawo okusosolagana, especially like NRM kubanga basosola nnyo abaana abamu abali mu bibiina ebirala muno kigenda kuleetawo butabanguko mu kulonda kuno. Oli olunaategeera nti oyo omwana simwaga ajja kwagala ateekeko abantu bamulwanyise kiveeko entalo.
The relevance of this is that we are going to come up with the new generations which are peacefully, the generations where conflicts will be no more. We are going to come up with the peaceful communities within our country.
So thank you. I hope you all enjoyed seeing a little bit of what we have been able to do in Uganda with the support of Denmark, and to see the range of activities that Extremely Together is doing in Uganda. But we have to acknowledge that despite all these efforts and everything that has been highlighted by our speakers, we are still far from where we want to be. Just last week, in fact, the UN Deputy Secretary General highlighted in her remarks at the high-level event on youth, peace and security that, and I quote, "It is critical to narrow the gap between the pace of normative progress in New York and the realities of youth participation at the country level. And many young peace builders tell us that their participation is not welcome by the public or those in position of power." And this is in fact confirmed by the results of our poll that we held earlier. And I'm really struck by the fact that 50% of respondents said that the biggest obstacle to youth participation is not being valued as a credible actor. So if it starts by young people not even being seen as agents, positive agents of change and credible actors, then really there's still a lot that we need to do. And the second highest ranking obstacle was defined as the lack of access to funding mechanisms. And that is something that I think that is also well known. So multilateral organizations, member states, must include young people with very diverse backgrounds in the international peace and security space. And this requires that we all take a critical look at our own actions, and that we really strive to engage young people between the circle of what I call the usual suspects, you know, and to really reach young people also in underserved communities, to reach young girls, young women, people with disabilities, people in especially vulnerable situation, young people in very vulnerable situation. And young people need themselves to take action and encourage governments to take measures ensuring diversity at all levels by writing letters, organizing petitions, contacting their legislators, and so on. So it's both. Everybody needs to really take action. And as we move forward, we will hear now from our speakers as to what they think themselves is still missing in our action. And let's go back immediately to Ali in Pakistan to ask him, based on his experience as an extremely together leader, what is still missing in our current efforts to include young people in peace and security efforts. Ali, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I think I would like to summarize the key points that Extremely Together position paper on this very issue that we released about 2 weeks ago presented. We held digital discussions all across the world with peace building and PV actors from across the globe, and we summarized the key points in a position paper that I'm sure that you can access from our website as well. So the first set of recommendations are for CSOs and youth groups and young people. As you know that violent groups tap into the sense of lack of belonging and lack of identity and identity crisis in youth. So our first recommendation is to engage more young people in civic actions and mobilize them in advocacy efforts as a way to provide a strong sense of belonging and a purpose and thus an identity. Number two is to support and amplify alternative narratives created by young people themselves. Because these narratives are organic, they have more traction with the local audiences. Number three is to build youth coalitions and empower peers with skills and knowledge on nonviolent advocacy. We think that building coalitions is very important because very often across the world and even in local, for example, in Pakistani context, many independent youth movements do not collaborate and do not build coalitions as much as they should. Number four, and the most important one, I think, is to push for new models of leadership and to demonstrate the added value of youth participation. Very recently, I learned about a movement that has a new leadership model, and they call it the Leaderless Movement. So there are no leaders in the movement, and it's a very anarchic leadership structure, but it works. And as new research is emerging, people are developing new models to address youth participation. The second set of recommendations are for multilateral organizations and member states of the EU and the UN. The first is that more young people should be engaged fully in the initiatives aimed at preventing and countering extremism. This is from design to implementation, and evaluation should be included in that. Quite often we find that youth actors are contacted after the frameworks have been developed, after M&E and learning frameworks have been developed, after key indicators have been set. So that doesn't work very well because the local dynamics are constantly evolving and changing with respect to the threats that the VE poses. In Pakistan, there is a new threat of VE. A new socio-political religious movement has emerged in the last 1.5 and 2 years. And no framework deals with this new movement that is more urban and that talks about the blasphemy law very much. So this is an important recommendation. The last recommendation is to dedicate specific funds to youth organizations engaged in peace building and security of efforts, which largely operate with limited budget and therefore fail to meet the donors' eligibility criteria. For example, in Pakistan, we have a lot of young social movements that are not registered as NGOs. You know, the social structure is not as such that they're registered entities that do not have the audits and the accounts. So there should be a way and mechanism to include them in the broader PVE movement. And in addition, investment in youth initiatives should not only be focused on addressing the threats posed by a minority of violent youth, but should aim to nurture youth leadership and resilience in a long-term manner. So that's it.
Thank you, Ali. And I think what you said really corresponds to the results of our poll, because when you talk about the new leadership model, this is exactly, I think, what people were saying when they're saying that the biggest obstacle is just not being seen as a credible actor just because of your young age. So I think this is a really important sort of conceptual but important point that has to be acted on, and of course the lack of funding and also the need to change legislation for registration of networks, CSOs, and so on. So thank you very much for this. Ida, again, we've talked about all the good things that Denmark has done, but and some of the questions that are coming in are about the fact that COVID-19, the pandemic, has really, really affected young people first and foremost. In fact, I mean, loss of employment and loss of education opportunities and so many other ways. But what do you think are the concrete steps that we still need to do to achieve the youth inclusion agenda?
Thank you very much, Corinne. And also, I just wanted to take a second out to just commend Ali for his input. I think you're really hitting the nail on the head with these recommendations, and something that duty bearers and states and countries really need to take into consideration if we are to move forward on this agenda. So even though Denmark is working hard on mainstreaming youth, it's still a work in process. And there's lots to be done, both from our side and from other sides. In that realization, we really looking to see what we can do more on this agenda. And we are currently in a work in progress on seeing which pushes we can make on this agenda. And we hope that we will be able to collaborate with others as well, so that we're not just pushing as individual countries, but rather as a collective effort. And I think that's one of the things that are really needed, like a collective push. To do that, I think we also need knowledge sharing and collaboration. So that's the first thing, knowledge sharing and a common push. And then the second thing is that I think also Kristin mentioned this, that we have a lot of papers already, policy papers, council conclusions, resolutions, but we really need to start making these policies work, or putting them to work on the ground. So I think that there is a strong gap there. I don't necessarily think that there is, or there, of course, there could be more policies, and that's always great. But those policies need to start working, and we need to start holding countries, putting accountable for what we have signed up to. We need to hold EU, UN accountable for the things that they're also pushing forward. So apply what's there instead of sort of reinventing over and over again. And then thirdly, I think there is a need to start walking the talk with regards to meaningful youth inclusion. That's also one of the things that Ali also mentioned, is that there is really a formal recognition of young people, but there's not really a practical recognition of young people. And the poll also shows this, that young people are not valued as actors. So I think countries like Denmark really need to start also walking the talk on this, working with and by young people rather than just for young people. And I think once they do this, they will also see that it is actually quite rewarding. So those are like the three overall things that I see is needed from a country perspective. So more knowledge sharing and working together on a common push. Start putting the papers and the policies that we have to use, and then starting to walk the talk on meaningful youth inclusion. And I think that if we do this in partnership with the young people, then that's when things really start to move and to matter.
Thank you, Ida. And that's a perfect transition really to Paul, because we've talked earlier, it's been mentioned, the adoption by the European Council of these conclusions on youth and the upcoming youth action plan and so on. But how do we make sure that all these policy papers, and also we have mentioned our own policy paper, our position paper that is on our website by Extremely Together. But how do we make sure, Paul, that this will be implemented? What, from your perspective as a young UN delegate, how do we make sure that we walk the talk and we finally implement all these resolutions and plans?
Thank you very much, and good morning, first of all. Well, having shared the speaking slot, allowing youth to speak up for themselves, especially in peace processes, is still an exception. And thank you here to Kristin for the invitation. It's a real honor, and I think it sends the right message. And of course to Denmark with the Kofi Annan Foundation to organize this event, and even so to youth activists and the organizations I consulted in preparation for this event. Usually, as I said, and Ida pointed out, our right to participate is still not recognized. That is normality. So in order to ensure active and meaningful youth participation in this agenda, you should, and here I'll focus on two items basically, which is process and funding. In the process, you should first, and most importantly, and here taking up Ali's point on leadership models, think youth-led from the beginning, really a youth agenda, and young people have to be the ones to design, or at least co-design, the implementation process. We've learned from Ida that it's often about working for youth, but instead working with youth. And for that, we really need to increase share decision-making power with us on projects and programs. That is also what the results show. In order for us to be taken seriously, in order for us to gain credibility, we need this leadership Ali was demanding for. Then the national level, the country level, and you cited Amina Mohammed when she said so. The national implementation on YPS is of course key and at least as important as the EU policy level. Work with youth-led organizations and young peace activists to, for example, design national action plans. Secondly, the process must be structured. structured. So institutionalized formats of meaningful participation, such as youth dialogues, according to the EU Youth Strategy. Take as an example the recent Council conclusion from 20th November on youth engagement on democracy, which took a first step when it included results of the recent EU youth conference in this document. We need more of those structured processes with assured possibilities of influence. Thirdly, take an intersectional approach. The participation of young people must be as diverse as possible. You shouldn't reinforce existing inequality structures by favoring those that are already in a favored position to participate, considering age, sex, education, origin, etc. So we need to particularly empower vulnerable groups through a more tailored approach, always first asking them what they would need to be able to participate. And fourthly, protect what is already there. Peace activists all around the world must fear repressions. Take a look at Belarus, Nigeria, Hong Kong, to only name 3. Saving these existing structures from being demoralized and threatened might sometimes serve the cause much better than a completely new program of action. Now let me come to funding. Of course, we need to start budgeting, as allocating more funds is always essential for accelerating progress. Increased focus on youth through the EU's contribution to the Peacebuilding Fund is one good example in the right direction. And here are some more few ideas. First of all, I'd like to echo Ali's point on funding for youth initiatives. And I think extremely together, the young leaders is a very good example. The recommendations are excellent. I've read them and I can echo them all. Secondly, invest in studies for evidence-based knowledge. We've heard a lot about this difficulty of being taken seriously. And I think studies on the positive contributions of youth before, during, and after conflict really can convince the last critique, as they did, for example, with women, peace and security, but can also help to better identify how to harness youth agency. And then it's important, thirdly, to spread the word. Really invest in dissemination and awareness raising about the YPS agenda and the recent Council conclusions, for example, through youth organizations, but also US formal institutions. Still, only few people in both civil society and institutions really know about them and know about the positive contribution of youth. So it's also your responsibility to work on that. When it comes to funding, fourthly, think again youth-led. Why don't you allow young people to decide about the allocation of resources and programs concerning themselves? You could follow the example of the Council of Europe's co-management system on youth, for example. And then lastly, an EU youth envoy could contribute to enhancing inclusion of youth, provided, of course, that it's not only of symbolic character, when it reinforces instead of diminishing the responsibility of institutions to act on youth, when it's adequately supported through a secretariat, for example, and when its selection process is legitimized through the inclusion of national youth councils and youth organizations. So let me say that in going forward, to highlight the point of accountability, which Ida recently mentioned, you'll need to, first of all, jointly with youth, define what meaningful inclusion and active participation means to you as policymakers. To succeed in the YPS agenda, you should then set measurable targets and, as Hilde Hardeman said earlier, determine key performance indicators, and then eventually stepping up concrete action according to them. I personally couldn't be the person to tell you how to measure the progress exactly, but there are certainly enough people to tell you, such as national youth councils and youth experts working on that. So let me conclude really by saying that many policy documents, they call or aim to promote active youth participation, such as the recent Council conclusions. And I'd say it's even easier than that. You must simply let us participate as being done today. Thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you, Paul, for these very, very clear and well-articulated recommendations. And you mentioned, again, the key performance indicator on inclusion as a good practice. And really, I think it is very much. So I'm very glad that we come back to Hilde, who mentioned it first, and to ask her what are some of the next steps for her for meaningful youth inclusion in the peace and security agenda, looking particularly at the new instruments in the EU, which will really define its thematic and geographic priorities for the next few years. Hilde.
Thank you very much. Well, I explained earlier how as a service and through the actions we support on the ground, we try to play our part to further the youth, peace and security agenda. Now, under the new instrument, our approach will be the same. So rest assured that strengthening the role of youth in building peaceful and just societies will remain really a key priority for us. And we will continue to support youth participation under the new instruments Rapid Response Pillar and through the thematic program on peace, stability and conflict prevention. So we will continue our work for inclusion, for real partnership. I've heard what you said about doctor-patient relationships, for empowering young people, for creating role models, which is really a central part of all our work. Now, can we do more? Can we do things differently? Certainly yes, and I am glad to see that the projects that we are funding today, like the Extremely Together project, also alert us on opportunities to become more effective at supporting the role of youth in peace building. Now, one factor that can help us to further strengthen the inclusion of youth when it comes to peace and security, not just our service, but the EU as a whole, and I think donor community as a whole and policy community, is to better understand the needs and expectations of young people and improve our knowledge of youth networks, of youth initiatives in the context where we engage. And here there is an important role to play for youth organizations and youth networks. We very much encourage experienced organizations to help youth organizations grow. Access to funding is not always easy to find if you do not know the mechanisms. And furthermore, once you get funds, managing them comes with a lot of work and responsibility. After all, it's taxpayers' money, which can be difficult to manage for a new organization. Hence, there is an important role to play for youth organizations and youth networks to help build local youth organizations and support them through the learning process. And this has really an enormous impact. I can give you some examples from Africa, from Southeast Asia, where we accompany youth to become youth leaders for positive change, looking not only at those that are already the front runners, but also looking at vulnerable groups, protecting also what is already there. And we have, for instance, let's say in the group of Boda drivers, seen some people really grow into big youth leaders with a very serious and important impact. We have seen young people using humor in the fight against violent extremism in a way that was extremely impactful. So we try on our side to support and encourage that process in every way we can. And we appeal once again upon those of you that are already there, that already have a network, already have an impact, to help others develop and share your experience. And we do on our side what we can to support. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hilde. Really, from everything that has been said, for me, I have noted. The conversation is very rich, and I think I will listen to it again later because the recording will be available. But I've noted already a few important things. One, it really, as we said, new models of leadership, as both Paul and Ali have said, which is a matter of having everything designed by young people, implemented by young people, including letting young people decide on the allocation of funds, for instance, as Paul was saying. I think this is really very important, that everything that we do for youth be done with youth, as you have said as well. Second, that this be a collective push and that we all help each other. So this knowledge sharing opportunity like today, but that we have to spread the word, highlight best practices, share knowledge. Third, that we have to transform policy into reality on the ground, which is always the trickiest part. Four, and this is very important, it's about walking the talk, as Ida said, but it's also about accountability and everything that we promise we must do. And that's why the idea of the key performance indicator in inclusion, I think, is really very, very important. 5, break out of the usual circle of usual suspects and target vulnerable groups of young people. 6, build the capacity of groups of young people, of youth networks, both by encouraging them to, the ones that are more established, as Hilde said, to help the newer one, by protecting peace activists, by funding. It's still important. As Hilde said, there has to be capacity to absorb the funding and to manage the funds. So that starts with capacity building and then funding. But you also need funding for capacity building often. And really, the last point was to better understand the context, have boots on the ground, ears on the ground, to understand really what the young people are going through. So our ability to listen to what's happening. I think all these points are really, really very important. And now we have a few more minutes. So that's really, thank you first to all the speakers for sticking with their, for complying with their time limits, and this allows us to take some of the questions that were asked. Again, a reminder that we can use the hashtag Youth for Peace in our discussions. So let me go to some of these questions. The first one, I mean, I already mentioned a little bit, is really about the effect of the pandemic that has affected young people disproportionately, and this is some of the things that came out of our consultations with Extremely Together over the summer. So, from your perspective, and maybe I'll ask this question to Ali. From your perspective, Ali, has the community of states done enough to involve youth in the response to all the instability created by the pandemic, and at the same time provide protection and relief to young people?
I think that's a very important question, because we're still in the middle of the pandemic in Pakistan. Now we have the second wave, and it's getting worse by the day. As far as your question of youth inclusion in policies and mechanisms to deal with the pandemic, not at all, zero. The government of Pakistan did not involve youth in any kind of policy, dialogue, or consultation or feedback. Youth themselves have been volunteering and stepping up to provide relief to people who lost their livelihoods due to the pandemic. And they have been the frontline warriors in this war against the pandemic in Pakistan. And it has been a beautiful effort. I know many PVE and CVE actors, including me, myself, we have been involved in this relief work because that was the #1 priority in the pandemic. But as far as the systematic inclusion of youth in this emerging policy of dealing with the pandemic, not at all. I think that could have been better. And I wish for it to get better, because youth are the #1 stakeholders in countries like Pakistan, where 65% population is youth, is below 32. I mean, what more can we expect from youth in terms of numbers? So they should have a meaningful representation on the table at different tiers of the government, in the UN, and especially when donor countries in the EU and in the US and the UN talk with the government, they should make sure that the youth representative are sitting on the table when they're having this dialogue of aid and, and dealing with the public health crisis, etc. Yeah.
Thank you, Ali. I can assure you, I'm quite sure it's not only in Pakistan, unfortunately, that this has happened, and there has to be a push, as you said, not only to take into account the special impact of the crisis on young people, but also of all the response to the crisis. If the young people's views are not taken into account, then the impact of the responses that we are designing now in 10 years or 20 years on future generations will not be taken into account. So thank you for this. We have another interesting question, which is maybe that I would direct to Ida and Hilde, maybe, if they want. The question is that we often hear that more evidence is needed on the benefits and positive impacts of youth mainstreaming in peace building. So there are cynics and skeptics out there. The person who asked the question says, I personally feel there is growing evidence, and I've seen this impact as an educator and researcher, but would you agree that there is a need for more evidence And if so, in which areas? Or in other words, what kind of questions do you hear when you work to advance the youth and peace and security agenda? Do you face skeptics of your own?
I can go first, and then Hilde, you're free to follow. I mean, there's more evidence is always good, but I think that there's really a need to start going out and creating evidence, and instead of just demanding it, then go out in our own projects and then try things out and then see what works, instead of sitting around waiting for the evidence to suddenly come by and be presented to us. I think that's one of the things that we should be doing. So go out and create our own evidence in the area where we feel that it's needed. In terms of skepticism, yes, there is definitely skepticism that we meet out there, especially due to some of the things that both Ali and Paul mentioned, with young people not being valued as equal partners, but rather just seen as like youth beneficiaries. So there's some skepticism when we work around, when we try to implement projects and when we try to suggest projects, even in our own ministry and in our own system. As I mentioned, it's a work in progress. So having somebody, a collective effort for youth engagement and for youth peace and security is really something that is needed, and more countries starting to also promote this agenda.
Thank you very much, Hilde. And maybe Hilde, I think you have to leave very soon, but if you can also respond to that question, that would be great.
Yes, thank you very much. And I will build on what Hilde said, and actually also a bit on what was said before. We have reports, we have documents, we have resolutions, we have evidence that inclusion is a key factor in ensuring sustainable peace, and the role and the place of youth and children in that inclusiveness is very, very important. So, as Hilde said, it's always good if there can be further research, if we can further beef it up. But I do not think that from our perspective that should be something to stop us. On the contrary, there is evidence. We have to put that evidence into practice. So just like we know that having women, the position of women taken into account, and women at the table in discussing when it comes to peace, also having young people there is absolutely crucial, especially as for them, there is a future, right? Old people may be looking more towards the past, maybe more married to the past, but for young people, they have their life in front of us, and it is crucial to find good solutions. A last point that I want to make is that we often also see that a question like, for instance, the place of children can be the type of topic around which a consensus can be found, because it is something that addresses everybody, that everybody feels concerned about, and that can help find solutions. I would leave it to that. More evidence for sure, but this should by no means stop us from doing concrete and actual work on the basis of the evidence and the documents there are today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hilde, and I think Paul wanted to comment on this, but at the same time, I would like to ask him as well. And then our last question after that, I think, will be directed to Christina. But before, for Paul, what would you say is, just if you had to single out one big achievement from the last 5 years since the adoption of the Security Council resolution? Some people are asking us, can you identify one big achievement that came out of this resolution? But I know you also wanted to say something else.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me very first add something on the pandemics. What the pandemic really displayed is that marginalization of youth is still a huge problem that we face, and that comes along with now the second point on whether we need more evidence or not. I really think it's about visibility. So when we discuss with Foreign Ministry, for example, of Germany, we really see the need to break down the agenda. They're still looking for words, for language, for how to express themselves on this issue. It's really a complicated process of even the studies that are there that are very clear, I believe, in language. They're very easy to understand, but still people need to be they need to be given to people at hand. And then even in talks or discussions with young people, as UN youth delegates, Eva, my colleague Eva, and I, we consult and do workshops with young people all over Germany. And what we feel is that there's still certain doubt among even young people, whether they have this right to leadership. And that is, of course, an effect of this leading narrative that youth is stigmatized and so on. So really, it's about visibility, and this point of dissemination, breaking down what we have and empowering young people to understand that, in fact, they do have the potential. And I trust that even within this audience here, or that there's still people that are in certain disbelief or doubt about the potential of young people. And that is not a problem, of course, because it's a process I do acknowledge. But really, it's this, we have to be really convinced about it. And I don't believe that everyone already is. And that brings me to the achievement that I believe that has been made since the 5 years. I mean, looking at the resolution from a normative perspective, of course, it's the steadiness of the agenda. So the reporting of the Secretary General, which will now help, of course, to serve as a resource as well for governments to draw upon. But more so, I think the discourse is really the achievement. The fact that we today are having this discussion, but apart from this, there's many more talks and discussions going on. There's a huge, taking UNOI and all these youth initiatives on youth peace building and youth activists. That is really the great achievement, I believe, that we're gaining in visibility and the discourse is being led. Me being here present today, being one of the examples. So really, that we are having the discussions. That is the most important, because that will lead to awareness raising. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you for this. I see that we have maybe we can extend for a couple more minutes. So I'd ask maybe the same question that I asked you about the biggest achievement of the resolution in the last few years to Christina, and then if Kristin wanted to tell us at the end there's a very practical question that people have asked is, this is all very well, but when we try to access, young people are saying, when we try to access European representatives in country, or for that matter, member states representative in embassies, we often don't have access. So if you have, what can be done to ensure that people can actually have access to the representatives in country? But let's start maybe first with Christina, please.
Thanks, Corinne. Do you hear me now? Okay. All right. No, just on your last point, at least, with the Danish embassies, as I was saying in my opening remarks, we have made some of these youth sounding boards to several of our embassies, exactly to try to drag in and listen to the young people, so we just don't make up all our own policies and talk about peace and security without having young people around the table. And I know that the EU delegations are doing that many places in the world too. So I think there is a change here, and I don't know if it's something concrete and you can be measured after the Security Council resolution, but I do think that these kind of efforts, and also more generally, general recognition of the role of youth, I think has somehow, and it's hard to measure this, but it has become more acceptable over the last 5 years. And I think this is mainly, one thing is that we try to invite young people in, but also because of young people's actions, as I was saying in my introductory remarks. We've just seen so many different circumstances, again, whether it's young people organizing, again, as I was saying, for climate change. I've seen very concrete examples in Lebanon with the Strong Cities Network, young people being engaged in amazing activities on CVE, of course, and what we just saw from Uganda also. There are so many initiatives around right now that I think it is actually, and I know that a lot of our audience here today have been talking about the lack of acknowledgement of young people and them being recognized as actors in this. But I get the feeling that there is a change in this, and because young people have shown that they're really up to it.
You want me to come in straight away as well, Corinne?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
No, yes. No, I think I can only compliment what Christina is saying about the fact that there are a lot of initiatives out there. I think if I look at the EU delegations, I think they're quite active across the globe in lots of engagement and together with member states a lot of the time. in engagement in different, projects and initiatives. But I would also say that there is, we've seen so many good initiatives coming from youth themselves. And I think that what we saw around the EU-Africa partnership and how that has built up, and this very strong credibility that is recognized through that, but also some of the other initiatives, there is certainly scope for doing more. But I would also say, as an advice to youth organizations, that don't wait to be invited, and I'm sure you don't, but don't wait to be invited. Invite us as well to be part of a discussion, of a process. Hold us accountable to the policies and declarations we've adopted, but also engage us in dialogue and initiative. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we won't have time to take more of the good questions that have come in, but we've heard a lot, I think, today already about good experiences and about the shortcomings on the ground of what's still happening, unfortunately, in terms of young people having a voice and having a decision-making power. So we have, as I mentioned, we have this position paper which is available on the website of the foundation and the Extremely Together group, and that has recommendations, and Ali mentioned some of them, for multilateral organizations and member states, and for member states as well as for civil organizations and for youth groups themselves. I would just say young people must take a lot of things in their hand, but there is, I want to caution that I was struck by an example of two young activists that I met recently, wonderful young women from Lebanon, very, very young, 15 and 20. We had something in Geneva that's called the Young Activist Summit recently. And these two young women basically, in the wake of the explosion in Beirut in August, created an incredible online platform to allow people to find missing relatives. And they gathered a lot of information in their bedrooms. They created an instrument that was wonderful and really helped a lot of people. And at the same time, they told me, they said, yes, we've done all this. This is great, but we still don't have a voice at the table. And the government was very happy to be let off the hook for some of the relief, by all these young people that we saw in the streets of Beirut that really stepped in. But it doesn't mean that the government should let go of its responsibilities. So I told these two young women, you have to hold the government accountable, as you just said, at every step, because it's just not enough to do wonderful things that the government is not doing. You have to hold to change profoundly the system itself. So, I just wanted to share this example because they were amazing young women. And this was a range of amazing young activists from around the world, actually, that were recognized by this Young Activist Summit that we participate in every year in Geneva. So just to thank you all really for your participation in this webinar today. We've kept it reasonably short so that nobody gets too tired, but I really want to thank you for your time, for the clear energy and passion that you bring. And I can see that this is not bureaucratic words. It's really something that you all believe in. And we must do better. We must go further in implementing the youth in peace and security agenda. But I come out of this full of energy and hope, actually, because I see that a lot of things, good things are being done. We will have the recording available. We make the recording available. And I just want to wish you all a very peaceful end of the year. Let's all wish for a peaceful 2021. And I really hope that this youth inclusion agenda is implemented before our young people become old themselves. So let's make it a reality in the next few years. And thank you all so much for being with us today. It was a real pleasure moderating this webinar. Bye-bye all.